So I made a mistake and I deleted the first part of my literary elements PowerPoint presentation recording. So I look different in the following videos than I do here because I'm redoing it all. So in Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? I assume, have done the close reading. I want to talk more specifically about our literary elements that we're dealing with here. We have our author, Joyce Carol Oates, who is probably, I don't want to say, I mean, she's a very noteworthy modern author of our times. She has published countless short stories, many novels, and the short story that we read for this week is one that is the most anthologized. It's incredibly popular and mainly because of its ambiguity and the the different ways that the story can be read. Here's a couple of pictures of her in her various ages. You guys know, I hope, based on reading the background, that the title of this story comes from a Bob Dylan song. And she actually dedicates this song to Bob Dylan, which I think is interesting. But look at the background information. There's more about this. So we have a couple of critical interpretations of this story. Some people say that it is a modern retelling of a fairy tale, where she kind of alludes to Snow White and Sleeping Beauty and Little Red Riding Hood. If you're interested in reading more about that, there's a fantastic article about it. Just let me know and I'll send it to you. It's very, very interesting, very good. Some people say that this is also a modern version of the Persephone Demeter myth. If you're not familiar with that, it's when Persephone is kidnapped by Hades to go and live in the underworld for 6 months out of the year, taking her away from her mother's home and forcing her into this kind of adulthood situation. And other people say that this is based on it's a modern retelling of a true crime story of the Pied Piper of Tucson, which of course is, Joyce Carol Oates herself said that it is inspiration for the short story. So I want to ask you guys, what do you think the title means? Because in some ways, I mean, what do we have here? We have a series of two questions. Where are you going? Where have you been? And again, I mentioned this in the close reading, going and been. Not only are these questions that a parent would ask of their children to kind of keep tabs on them, something that Connie doesn't really have, they're also questions that people ask when they're getting to know us. Think about your introductory discussion boards. Tell me a little bit about you, your past, and tell me what you want to do in the future after Germana. Tell me about your future. Where are you going? Where have you been? And somewhere in between those two questions, I think, lies the present. And I'm not entirely sure, but I think that while the title does refer to Connie, I mean, it's the title itself. What I find it interesting is it's not where's Connie going, where's Connie been, but it's you. It's putting you, the reader, in that situation, in that position. And I think in some ways we are supposed to kind of look at ourselves, and kind of put ourselves in Connie's shoes, because I think in some ways we've all been where Connie's been, not necessarily approached by some, murdering serial killer, but we all have to take stock of our world views. Where are we going? Where have we been? And it brings into a sense that question of identity. Who are we? And what is our lasting impact on the world? And I think that those are questions that Connie is struggling to answer as a 15-year-old girl. Who will I be? who am I? So I think that it's interesting to look at the title in that way. So moving on to our narrator point of view, we have a third person limited narrator. It's a narrator who is outside of the story, and we only really get Connie's perspective of what's going on. And what I think is interesting, like Connie is the only one that we have insight to. The fact that the point of view is limited, um, think about Connie for a minute. Her worldview, her perception of the world is very limited. She hasn't gone anywhere. She hasn't done anything outside of her small little town and her own little vain world that she's wrapped up in. All of her knowledge, all of what she knows about the world is tied to outside influences. And what I mean by outside influences, it's things that aren't real. There's stories that have been told to her through music, through movies, and it's based on her experience with the nuclear family, for better or for worse. So therein lies, I think, some of the interesting insights into Connie's character, which we get through our narrator, but also leads us to the source of our conflict. So our plot is also limited in some ways because really very little happens in this story. It focuses on one short period of time, right? Kind of like Connie's short little life, where Arnold Friend is talking to Connie outside, where he traps her into this conversation and traps her into what will be her future. And it's told chronologically. There's no flashback, there's no flash forward or anything like that. We only have the present, the here and the now, which kind of I think goes back to our title where we have our past and our future. But this is very much dealing with Connie's present. Our characters include Arnold Friend, who I talked a lot about in the close reading, so I don't want to go too much into Arnold, other than to make note of his name, which is interesting. If you take the R's out of his name, you get an old fiend. What is a fiend? It's someone who causes us harm, or akin to a devil, so to speak. We have an old friend, someone who is familiar to us, someone who knows us as Arnold seems to know Connie, or know a version of Connie that she presents to the world. But if you look at the French pronunciation of Arnold Friend, you would get Arno Friend. So I think it all lies in here with that last name, Friend. It's deceitful, it's deceiving, because when you think about friend, you think of something that's familiar, something that's non-threatening, something that is comforting, someone who means you no harm. And of course, we know that this is not true with Arnold. He has a strange appearance, and I don't mean by what he looks like. I mean that he appears in a strange, kind of mystical way out of nowhere. He is this all-knowing, omniscient character. I mean, think about it. He knows everything about her past. He knows that the lady next door is dead. He knows her best friend. And again, it goes back to he knows that version of Connie that she presents to the outside world. He's a smooth talker. And some people, in some cases, say that he is a representation of the devil, of Satan. And the devil or Satan has this smooth talking all-knowing ability that kind of tempts, it's a way for him to tempt us into whatever we desire, whether it's good or bad, and typically, the devil bad. He also is described as having this big wolf grin. So again, it harkens back to those fairy tale illusions of the big bad wolf who huffs and puffs and blows the house down, as he threatens to do with the cardboard box that Connie lives in. And then, of course, we have Connie, who is our protagonist. And again, I talked a lot about Connie in our close reading, so I'm not going to really talk too much about her here. But we have in Connie this protagonist who is young, vain, she's two-sided, and in some way there's that duality. She's in this transformative age of childhood and adulthood, and she's flirting with those kind of sexual desires of of boys, and in some ways that's dangerous, in some ways it's natural. And I think that she's also stuck between these 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 two worlds, again with the title, "Where are you going, where have you been?" She's stuck with who she is, or who she has been, like her past, her family, her mother, so to speak, and then who she's going to be. Is she going to be like her mom? Is she going to be like June, who she's constantly compared to? Which brings me to her mom and June as characters. They symbolic of Connie's future? And if you think about this, um, Connie's mom is a representation of womanhood at the time. She's a stay-at-home mom. She doesn't, work. She used to be beautiful, just like Connie. And then we have June, who she's also constantly compared to, who still lives at home and goes out to work, but she's not as attractive and she's not as pretty. And I think that both of these women are representations of women at the time. Think of June Cleaver. Think of that 1960s Leave It to Beaver Americana, where we have this innocent, this age of innocence, so to speak. And Connie, in some ways, wants to break that mold. What does she dream about? She dreams about this escape of leaving the home and being something different. So in some ways, she's kind of that new woman that is stuck between the past and the present, and ultimately the future. So I'm going to stop here because my video picks up talking about Mom and June. But the idea is that she has this desire to leave the home and be something different, and she's never really given that opportunity.